All right. If you can find your way to a seat, if that's at least the case. I think some of you standing up there are receptive. All right. Ooh. Hello, hello. Oh. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Yeah? So I know that you all are just as excited as I am to be hosting not one, but four really brilliant minds. And I know most of you are familiar with probably one person, but after today you'll be familiar with all four. Today we are here for Not Too Late, which brings together powerful voices from around the world to address the political, scientific, social, and emotional dimensions for the most urgent issue human beings have ever faced, climate change. But don't get too sad, too into the existential dread. We're here today to talk about the possibilities. And today we have with us Antonia Juhas, say that? Yes. Leading energy and climate author and investigative journalist, who is currently the senior researcher on fossil fuels at Human Rights Watch. She is an award-winning writer with a ton of bylines that we don't have time for, but it's a lot of them. Look them up. Her investigation follows the trail of oil as it seeps into virtually every corner of human existence, from climate change to the environment, public health, human rights, and from war to peace. And just as an FYI, a lot of her writing comes with her photographs, so we double. Woo! Next up, we've got Marianne Hitt, who is the Senior Director of Climate Imperative. Yeah, give her a round of applause. Marianne has over 25 years of experience building and leading effective campaigns and awards. Prior to Climate Imperative, she was actually with the Sierra Club, where she was the National Director of Campaigns for 12 years. Give it up for her. Put it up for you. We also have Renato Redentor Constantino. I say that okay? Yes! Killing it today, y'all. Who is a member of the board of the People's Survival Fund, the first legislated Philippine adaptation funding mechanism dedicated to supporting adaptation action agenda of local governments and communities. He is the author of the book Poverty of Memory, Essays on History and Empire, published in 2006, and one of his essays was actually included in Letters to Earth, alongside, of course, Not Too Late. And last, but certainly not least, we have Rebecca Solnit, known writer, historian, and activist. She's the author of more than 20 books on feminism, Western and urban history, popular power, social change, and a whole lot more. They include Orwell's Roses, Hope in the Dark, Men Explain Things to Me, A Paradise in Hell. She is a product of the California public education system from kindergarten to graduate school, and she writes regularly for The Guardian, serving on the board of the climate group Oil Change International, and recently launched the climate project, Not Too Late. And you can find out more at nottoolateclimate.com. Without further ado, let's give our speaker guest a round of applause.
Who knew I'd grow up to be doing theater? So it's great to be here. It is so great to be on this stage with these people and awed to be up here with who are my heroes. Red and Antonia are old friends, Marianne's a new friend. They've done such extraordinary things, some of which we'll talk about. And there's also something really kind of wild that I didn't know was going to happen, which is the people who are why this book exists are somewhere in the room. So a little over a year ago, Annie Leonard, co-director of Greenpeace USA, invited me to dinner with a couple of her board members, one of whom was Saket Soni of Resilience Force, which is a project to essentially protect the rights and organize undocumented people who clean up after our climate disasters and build relationships between the communities they save, who are often anti-immigrant and racist and told they get transformed and rebuilt. And Saket had worked in Lake Charles, Louisiana, so I was like, you have to meet Arlie Hochschild, who'd also done a bunch of work down there as a sociologist. So we had a dinner party at the Writers' Adam in Arlie Hochschild's house. And thank you. And we did a go around about whatever he was doing, and I think last, and I said, I'm not doing any more books for a while because I'm trying to be a better climate activist. And my friend Pelma Young-Mutuna Tabu and I have started this project called Not Too Late to address climate despair, grief, anxiety, despair, doomism, with good facts, good frameworks, good stories, changing the stories people tell about who we are and what we can do. And they all politely listened to me, and then they just looked at me and kind of rolled their eyes and said, Rebecca, that needs to be a book. And I didn't really mind being told to do another book because it's the main thing I know how to do. So by 10:30 the next morning, we had an agreement to publish with Haymarket, and Thelma and I were off and running. And she's a real organizer. She's with 350.org for a long time. She's with the Solutions Project now. So she came and stayed with me in my San Francisco apartment. We got out a big piece of foam core we pretended was a whiteboard and made Post-its of the subjects we needed to cover and the people who were our dream team. And every single person we asked said yes. So we've got these amazing people. We've got Adrienne Lee Brown, we've got the Pacific Climate Warriors, and we've got these three. It was completely amazing to get them all. And it was also this beautiful moment when everyone in the book found out who else was in the book with them and got kind of happy about that. So it's been a really good project, which is not to say that we don't take climate change seriously. And, and we do recognize that there's lots of legitimate reasons to feel overwhelmed and devastated and et cetera, but we all have a lot of work to do. We really wanted to take the paralysis of feeling that there's nothing we can do, that it's too late, that we don't have the solutions, that nobody's doing anything, and really transform it to, Thelma and I are nice ladies, so we wanted to address people's feelings, but we also are climate people, and we wanted to build an on-ramp for everyone, including everyone in this room who isn't there already, although I know a lot of you are, to become a climate activist. So, and we think it's a lot about facts and frameworks. Americans are really, especially middle-class white Americans, are, you are God's defeatist people. And, there's so many stories about, and a lot of it is not wanting to come to terms with the uncertainty of the future, of insisting that the future has already been decided. And for me, both optimism and pessimism are ways of asserting that we already know what's going to happen, so there's nothing to do, which for those of us who lead relatively comfortable lives in the global north gets us off the hook. For people on the front lines, it usually means, when we're saying it, go drown. And but it is not too late. We are deciding now what we do now matters. The climate movement, I've been around long enough to watch it grow in strategy, in sophistication, and intersectionality. We have the solutions. One of the things I find most amazing about the 21st century is that when it began, we did not have, renewables were weak, expensive, utterly inadequate technologies for what we needed to do in response to climate. We've had an energy revolution, which, like most of the revolutions of my lifetime, like gender, like nature, like race, have been so slow and incremental that people haven't noticed them. We now could leave the age of fossil fuel behind, and the obstacles are largely political. There's a lot of practical stuff we have to do, but the only reasons we're not doing them full speed ahead are essentially political, and those are things we can change. We know physics is a problem that in a sense has been solved, and politics is a problem we need to solve now. So I think a lot in terms of the frameworks, the stories we tell ourselves about whether or not we can achieve our goals, the stories about who we are, the stories of the past that tell us we're powerful or powerless. And stories about power are always stories about how change works. There's often, and I think part of American despair comes from American amnesia, the idea that nothing has changed, the lack of memory for radical movements that have changed things, and also the idea that if we do something on Tuesday and we don't get met with full results as demanded on Wednesday, we failed, when incremental and indirect consequences are so often how these things work. Or they're prolonged battles, like the dozen years it took to kill the KXL pipeline. And so stories about the nature of change, the nature of power, the nature of human nature, I think that's something that's really impacting a lot of young people now, are stories that tell us we're very fragile, we're unable to deal with precariousness, unpredictability, difficulty, etc. And this again is something I think stories can really help with. Stories of that one of our authors, Yotam Baram, tells about how Native Americans faced the end of their world, how Jews in the Holocaust also, which includes some of Yotam's and my relatives, faced the end of their worlds, that people can meet extraordinary circumstances and have, and not everyone rises to the occasion, but people do. I think, and so these stories matter, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a great policy wonk like everyone to the left of me here, and but I am a storyteller, and changing the stories, for example, changing the story that has been often told about climate, which is that we now live in an age of abundance, which is literally not true materially for most people on Earth now, and even for those of us, the affluent, who I suspect is most of us in this room. We live in a profound poverty of social connectedness to nature, a sense of moral integrity about our relationship to the material world, a sense of hopefulness, and the things we need to do for climate in these respects could change us from an era of not of going from scarcity to abundance, but this is really fucking noisy and it's really hard to think. So I will start extemporizing soon and hand it over. And there was no prep time because it was very chaotic. Most of the moments of today until I was up here. But essentially, there's a story that's constantly told, and it was probably true a while ago that we live, that what climate required of us was austerity and renunciation. It's not necessarily true now. The game has changed in a lot of ways, but I think that's also really important to change the story about what constitutes abundance, what constitutes renunciation, about the fact that renouncing fossil fuel, renouncing the alienation, the toxicity of fossil fuel to our politics as well as our air, water, soil, food, and bodies is part of what we can do to change the story. So this is a book of stories, a book about changing the story, and a book by the people who have changed the story. And now I'm going to make them talk, and I'm not sure who should go first. Okay, Philippines, West Virginia, duke it out.
Okay, overruled. Hi, my name is Sulong, so I'm usually called Red. It's easy to spell as well. As a child, it was a cheat sheet. It just put 3 letters. Red Constantino. I guess the first thing is I'm really delighted to be not only on the stage, but part of a book that has the 3 of you. It's a real honor. It's a real joy. Because the book that I hope you'll all get at least 1, if not several copies of, has a lot for everyone. I had this brief conversation with Rebecca online where I told her about the plans to bring this to the IMF meeting, which, I have to apologize first that I'm still in my IMF costume. And then in June at the subsidiary body negotiations at the climate talks. And then again at the COP, and Rebecca said, they may not need it, it's not for climate experts. And I disagree really strongly, because the climate experts need this book. And if you're an expert yourself here, you need this book, because we need this book to be sent and shared, and the message shared. We cannot win our big battles with science and technical reports and policy making alone. There's a lot of grounding that we need. We need a lot of expertise and policy wonkery, for sure, but it's not enough. It's insufficient. And you'll get a lot of things from the book, depending on the gaps that you may not even know you have. For me, the book, if I give it out to most people that are expertise in my world, I point them to John Halifax and Yotam Marang's essays. Because these are the things that ground a lot of those working on climate for over a decade, which means, like me, you're also doing, your work is a doomsday day job, because you're looking at a world that's falling apart. But we often neglect to understand or recognize that we're also looking at a world that we're trying to rebuild. So if you're waiting for collapse, because that's what often the narrative is, and it's annoying to keep confronting this narrative of collapse every year, and activists also talking about deadlines, in 7 years this, in 12 years things fall apart. It's not true. Because the collapse is not like The Last of Us, where you wake up and see that everything's been consumed by cordyceps. It's already happening. And for a lot of families, they've been facing or have been defeated by collapse. It's underway. At the same time as things are being rebuilt, a rethinking, a reimagining of what is possible, and erecting and constructing the future that we want. It gives us fear, which is good, and it gives us hope, which is even better. And so, when I was invited by Rebecca to consider contributing, immediately, of course, I said yes. One, because the story of hope is not only something that Rebecca tells well, she also encourages a lot of other stories to tell hope from different angles. And all of us have that, except we don't tell that story enough. And so for me, I have three anchors in the work that I do that makes me wake up in the morning properly. One is just a silly saying that I tell myself, in times of adversity, to gain your bearings and lose your marbles. Constantly, because that's what we need. You have to, this is the decade where you roll the dice. And something, you'll get snake eyes and you'll get a lot of things, but do it anyway. Lose your marbles, gain your bearings, because you need both. The other is that it's not enough to just say love is what makes the world go around. It's a firm personal belief that it's stubborn people that makes the world go around as well. Stubborn people who are just so neurotically steadfast about not ever accepting what is the future that we're being given. And to just say no, we will have a different one. We don't know if we will succeed, but we will build it anyway, because that's what we need. And you guys, watch out. The third one is something that I mentioned 2 days ago in Brooklyn, which is also why I'm in my IMF costume, because I went through a bit of hell in New York subways where everything was delayed, and I ended up 30 minutes late to that event. And so I didn't want to take a chance and go back and go into jeans. And it's a saying by Richard Rohr, which I hope will resonate with some of you. He said that the opposite of faith is not doubt, which is what people often think of. The opposite of faith is not doubt, but certitude. That's the opposite of faith, because it's also certainties that have led us to where we are right now. The conceit of our certainties, that we can fix our way through this problem through cash, through technology, through status quo, or through just pretending that we can afford to not care, and we can afford despair, which we cannot afford. And so those things drive me, and it's also the basis of what I think had driven me to write my contribution in this book, which is a story about the Paris Agreement that has not been told. And it was a delight to tell that story in the book, because that title of that essay is How the Ants Moved the Elephants in Paris. Individually, as individuals, we're all ants. and we're pretty weak in a way. As countries, a lot of ants out there as well. But in Paris, the ants moved the elephants because the ants decided that if their survival and their ability not only to survive but to thrive is not something that they will see in the final agreement, then we will all walk away. And that is the story that's in the book itself, which was a story, which is a story about insurgency that took on the complacency of a lot of the governments that were negotiating the climate treaty then, including a large number of friends from the big NGOs who did not only not believe that 1.5 was possible and necessary, but who also actively tried to kill that idea, which is a bit controversial today because many of those friends also never admitted to the fact that they didn't like 1.5 and that they wanted it out of the climate talks. But the small countries didn't give a shit. And they said, to the warning that if you push for 1.5, please know that it can likely lead to collapse in the talks. The response was, when we walk away, then this all collapses, because we will walk away. A funny story there that I think it's fine to share now here is that as we galvanize a lot of the things that people wanted and try to tell them that that 1.5 should be where it is right now, which is in Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. One of the delegations that we needed to really turn around was the Vatican. And I was still part of the team of the Philippine presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum then, and we had arranged a meeting at our delegation room with the members of the Holy See, who are not convinced yet that 1.5 is something that should be seen in the Paris Agreement. Why? Because they share the belief of other big governments and unfortunately other INGOs, where they thought that what was possible is the only game in town, which is what the big countries, both big emitters in the developing world and the developed countries, had said. And so the Vatican also thought this way. And I thought, this is something that will be difficult. So I closed the door when, in full garb, the archbishops, the cardinals, wearing all purple, just came in. And I closed the door and looked them in the eye as I turned the doorknob. And it's like something got into me. I closed the door and looked at the archbishop's eyes and said, Your Excellencies, my apologies, but I'm locking the door. We will not leave the room until we get an agreement from you. And that was funny because at the last, it took an hour to convince them. And the Archbishop, the Archbishop Auza, still was hesitating because he was surrounded as well by other scientists, bishops, who said, we're not sure this can be possible. And that's what Archbishop Auza said. And for some reason, I blurted out something that I was, for the first time, is in writing. I said to Archbishop, Your Excellency, don't hesitate. God will show you the way. I didn't really cringe or flinch, but what did I say? And things changed from there. And there's a lot more, of course, in that book, but it was that moment. And I think that story is important because we're always facing all these things. Vanuatu. What is that ant doing? And probably they got laughed out of so many rooms when they raised this possibility. And they weren't the first.
Should we unpack that story?
Yes.
No. So, another contributor to this book is Julian Aguilon, who's indigenous to Guam, a beautiful writer and poet with an extraordinary piece in the book, and a human rights lawyer with the Blue Ocean law firm in the South Pacific. And they took on Well, the story begins with law students in the tiny island nation of Vanuatu, one of the places most imperiled by climate change. And the students thought, what can they do about climate change? And there's so many situations we know where people say, oh, there's nothing I can do. And you can see why people in a nation that's supposed to be doomed, a small place, a remote place, could say that. But these students didn't say that. They were like, what can we do? And they wrote a brilliant proposal, which the Blue Ocean law firm took out, which just unanimously was approved at the United Nations at the end of last month, to have the International Court of Justice essentially call to the carpet all the nations to force them to live up to the Paris commitments. We don't know yet if it will be the powerful lever it could be, but to see a group of students start out, to stick with it for the 3 or 4 years it took, and then to see this momentous victory in the United Nations is the kind of thing that I think can keep you hopeful in the present. And it's also about people who have that faith that's opposite of certainty. Because what I mostly see with certainty is people saying it will never work. We saw that all through the Green New Deal that became the Biden platform, that became Build Back Better, that became the IRA, which I know that Marianne has been very connected to. We saw it with the pipeline. We've seen it with so many issues. We saw it with slavery, the abolition of slavery and women getting the vote a little while back in this country. So stories like that are why Julian talks about Indigenous people can address the future because they can remember the past. And the theologian Walter Brueggemann, who I also quote in here, says that memory breeds hope the way amnesia breeds despair. And so knowing stories like Red's story of how maybe the 1.5 pivoted on a guy walking a bunch of cardinals and archbishops in a room and speaking their language to them. To know these stories encourages us, a word that is often disparaged, but that literally means to instill courage. And so collecting those stories, giving us a deep past that can help us build a deep future has been so much of the work I've tried to do as a storyteller, and for me makes Red's story that really hadn't been told before of how we got to 1.5. And it's amazing now, we may overshoot 1.5, but when I hear people talk about it, they think Moses came down from Mount Sinai with 1.5 engraved on the tablets of the law or something. They treat it like it's some inexorable law of physics rather than, about a particular measurement system that could have been a different measurement system since it's all different in Fahrenheit. And it was also about a very specific battle that began in Copenhagen and was won in Paris thanks to Red and his cohorts taking on the most powerful nations and winning.
Everyone will have a big role, and that's literal. So, my first time to finally meet Antonia, who most of us read her. So it's a pleasure to be on, not just to meet her, but be on the same stage. I worked with Marianne as well on a few years ago on ENCODE. All different items to bring down the thing that harms all of us. All the small things will matter in the end, because some will work on Paris and the negotiations or with the IMF, because we have to do everything we can to just dismantle the things that harm us, and sometimes you need to work on the very institutions that also were the source of harm. The IMF, who will forget? And if you don't know yet, once you know it, you should not forget the harm that it inflicted in terms of structural adjustment programs. As in horrible, brutal harm across so many economies because of austerity programs. But we're working with them right now, not because we believe them, but because they're so necessary. And the meeting that I was in earlier, just to complete something I opened but forgot to circle back on, that this book is needed by experts. The managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, opened our meeting at the B20. It was filled with 200 people, finance ministers, the heads of G20, G7, and so on. And Georgieva just held the book up and said, this is the book that should remind us of what we need to do, not too late. And each finance minister had this copy in front of them. Right? And I hope they read every single page. And Kristalina will, because that's what she does. She's she's still the head of to me, a very interesting institution. But what we want, for instance, is what they're trying to do right now. And they're not doing it because they feel nice about it, but because we force them to. So one of the things we're working on is to get them to apply universal surveillance of what is called transition risks and physical climate risks, which means that the rules that they impose on the small countries is a rule that they should also impose on the US and Germany and everywhere, which is to start factoring into their macroeconomic projections what stranding assets will impose on the fossil fuel industry, what lack of resilience programs will create on the economies of the world, and apply it everywhere. Because then you trigger a cascade of revaluation of fossil assets, of infrastructure, and so on. Unfortunately, the IMF is the only institution right now that can do that. We can build a new one, but we don't have time for that. And right now, the last few years of this decade is when the big action is needed. The next decade, let's talk again, because maybe we need to make more trouble. But the trouble that we can see now is to give these institutions a dilemma, because they cannot refuse this. It's easy for them actually to ignore us if we say, down with you buggers, and dismantle the IMF. It's easier because they shrug it off. Yeah, sure, okay. But if you give them something that they need to deal with, that changes a lot of other things. And everything really matters because the extreme weather events that has hit not only the US, but so many other countries. We have to remember that these are extreme weather events that took place because of emissions that we failed to prevent 3 decades ago. What is history to humans is still current affairs to nature. But it also means that if you look at the progress of science, science also says that if emissions stop tomorrow, unlike the understanding of 10 years ago, the impacts will dramatically go down. Will it disappear? No. Will it be able, can we bring it down? Yes. And that's why the deadlines, the 7 years, collapse 2030, that's all crap. Because when does the struggle to reduce climate suffering stop? It never stops. And our ability to move to a world that's better, why should that have a deadline as well? You work on it now until you can, because every single win will matter. And as you do that, you need all the emotions that we can marshal. You need anger, you need love, but you also need to feel joy. That at the end of the day, joy may be that you screwed up this big corporation, and that in the afternoon I will grab an ice cream and I will ride a bike, and I will be happy. Because the next day, I'll be even more eager to do more damage. And I guess I'll stop there because like I said, the book has all these stories. Tony and Mary Ann will be stories that I'd happily distribute as well.
So, Red lost the battle of going first, and you two decided who should go second.
Is this one working? Here we go. Is that okay? Should I use the other one? All right, well, it's an honor to be with all of you, some friends and climate heroes in the audience. And again, my name is Mary Ann Hitt, and when I got an invitation from Rebecca Solnit to contribute an essay to this book, I if I was sitting in the chair, I'm pretty sure I fell out of the chair. Because Rebecca is someone that I have always looked up to as one of the clearest voices we have for the agency and ability that we have to build the future that our kids deserve. And it's already been said so many times on this stage. I love Red, I loved your quote that the opposite of faith is certainty. And I think from Richard Rohr. And I think, when I think about what that means to me, I was at the Sierra Club for 12 years. Most of that time I was leading a campaign called the Beyond Coal campaign. And I live in West Virginia. I spent most of my life in Appalachia. And the work that we set out to do when I started was to move the United States beyond coal. Now I think we can all look at that. We can look at where we are, where we're getting our electricity in this country and think, well, of course we're not getting all of our electricity from coal anymore. That's a foregone conclusion. The renewable era is beginning. But when we started this about a decade ago, it seemed absolutely impossible. We were getting half of our electricity from coal. There were plans on the drawing board to build 200 brand new coal-fired power plants that would have replaced all of the existing ones. Coal was the cheapest form of electricity in the United States. Renewables were, as Rebecca was saying, they were expensive. They weren't quite ready for prime time at the way that they are now. And we were scrappy grassroots activists in places like Appalachia that the coal industry had controlled for generations. And so the idea that we could first stop 200 new coal plants from being built in the United States, which was not just the Sierra Club, it was over 300 organizations that ultimately made this possible. The fact that we could do that with the grassroots people power movement, stop 200 new coal plants, and then take on the existing 500 coal plants, having learned everything we learned about how these decisions were made about where our electricity comes from. So stop the 200 new coal plants, and then take on the 500 existing coal plants that were making half of our electricity at the time. That was an act of faith, ultimately. The certainty was that, and this is what I was told many times, is coal makes half of our electricity. It's always been that way. It always will be that way. And maybe we can clean it up, and maybe we can put some of the pollution in some better places. But we're going to need this coal basically forever. And we had faith and a strategy and a movement and some incredible leadership from all over the country. And today, we are getting more electricity from renewable energy than we are from coal. And I have done all that work rooted in Appalachia. I grew up in East Tennessee. I went to the same high school as Dolly Parton. That's our claim to fame. And now live in West Virginia, where if only Dolly was here, but to settle for me. My husband is a 10th generation West Virginian, so on his side of the family, I have a daughter who's an 11th generation West Virginian. So I've done all this also rooted in understanding what this means for people, for people's lives, for people's livelihoods, and that's both the people who have worked for generations in the fossil fuel industry and also the people who have been bearing the brunt of pollution from the fossil fuel industry, most often low-income communities of color. So very mindful of the fact that we can't just make this transition, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't leave people behind. So I have been part of this movement of people that have been trying to make a way when there's no way, and to make a path by walking, and to chart this course forward to a world that's not powered with fossil fuels anymore. And Rebecca was always one of the writers that I felt like had that same sort of clarity of vision to say, the world has been made by people who are reaching out and building something that no one else thinks is possible. And then I got the book, and as Fred said, this is not just for people new to climate. If you've been doing this for a long time, like I have, there's so much inspiration, there's so much wisdom. This is a book full of essays of people who have done that, who have who have made a way when it seemed like there was no way, have given us a fighting chance at a safe climate. And I just want to just share one more reflection. So last week was spring break, and I went to visit my sister, who's a professor in Washington State, the other Tacoma. So I went from one Tacoma to this Tacoma. And she asked me to do a campus lecture and then asked the other professors if anybody wanted me to come to their class. And 4 professors wanted me to come to their class. So on my spring break, I ended up talking about climate change. But I went and I talked to all of these classes of undergraduates, and I started asking them questions. And I asked them about how they're feeling about climate change and this idea that it's not too late. And I was shocked, honestly, and I've been doing this for a long time, by how hopeless those college students were. I was really floored, to be honest, with how hopeless those college students were. They don't want to have kids. They think nobody's going to do anything about this. And I knew about this at one level. Like, I have a 12-year-old and trying to kind of pay attention to what younger generation is. But it was just hearing like one class after another of all these students kind of say the same thing to me, that they really don't have a lot of hope for the future. And I just thought, God, what is it like to grow up that way? And what is it like to be looking out at your future with that very real sense? And I just kept waving this book around because if there are 3 words that I can sum up what I've been trying to say my whole entire career, it's not too late. Those are the 3 words I've basically been trying to say over and over in all different kinds of ways. And having started to, in Appalachia, taking on the coal industry, and then coming to the other side of that and having seen David beat Goliath time after time again and seeing what people-powered movements can do. The essay that I wrote in this book is a love letter from the clean energy future. And I tried to do that. I tried to move myself to 2030 and imagine what would have happened between now and then if we got this right. And if we actually if we got to a world in the United States, I focus on that primarily, but if we got to a world powered primarily by clean energy, as we know in the US, our climate goals, if we want to do our part towards 1.5 degrees, we need to be to 80% clean energy in the United States. That needs to be 100% by 2030, it needs to be 100% clean energy by 2035 at the latest. And we need a big enough clean energy grid to power electrifying everything else. Electrify our cars, electrify our trucks, electrify our buildings, electrify our industry. So we're not using coal, oil, and gas anymore. And so I put myself forward to 2030 just in the same way that we imagined ourselves moving beyond coal and said, okay, well, what would have happened? What were the big, it's not a roadmap because we have to make the map, but it was at least the signposts along the way. What would have happened between now and then to get us to 2030? And looking back and telling the story of what we did. And that's the message I would want to give to those college students that I tried to give them. That's the message I would want to give anyone watching online, all of you, is that we have all of the ingredients right now that we need. Clean energy is cheaper. The political will is finally on our side. I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act is not perfect, but we passed a massive climate bill in the United States Congress. And we were not able to do that a decade ago. So we've got political will, we've got public will, we've got the solutions are cheaper, we've got this growing awareness about environmental justice and a just transition so we don't leave people behind. And I just want to thank you again for bringing these voices together, because I did leave that college thinking we have got to tell a better story to these students and these young people about what is possible and what we can get done over the next decade. Because we can do this, you all. Like, we can do this. I really believe that we can look back a decade from now and have made the decisions and built the movement and won the battles that are going to make our kids proud. And so, it's not too late. cute. All right, thank you all so much. First, I want to thank Rebecca for creating this incredible platform and inviting and uplifting so many voices within it, which is what she does and does so powerfully and has done so beautifully in this book. So I want to thank you for that, Rebecca. And I want to thank Red, and I want to thank Marianne, incredible stage to be on, and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. There are so many powerful voices in this book, and it is such a pleasure and joy and inspiration to read. And there's so many lines that I could quote from it, but I'm just going to pick one, which is that you cannot confront the climate crisis alone, but we cannot confront it without you. You can't confront it alone, but we cannot win without you. And we cannot confront the climate crisis without ending the era of fossil fuels. We cannot confront the climate crisis without ending the era of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the primary contributor to the climate crisis. Without unwinding all of the myriad human rights, environmental, climate, political, economic, social, health, crimes of fossil fuels in the fossil fuel industry, we cannot achieve the just transition, the change to an economy and a society that embraces a non-extractivist model and instead a regenerative model of being, of living, of sharing with one another, of building that future that will not only make it possible for so many more of us to have a future, or have a future that isn't entirely embedded in and guided by just getting past the crisis in front of us, just surviving, living a life that is beyond just getting past that next crisis. We can't do that together unless we confront fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry. It's at the heart of that transition, that transitional process. The good news, there's so much good news when it comes to this, you'd be shocked. The fossil fuel industry has been teetering on the brink of collapse, really for decades. And it keeps getting pushed closer and closer and closer because more and more people are experiencing the harms personally through the climate crisis, but also as the fossil fuel industry has expanded its operations, what had been an industry that had succeeded for a very long time in isolating itself intentionally, perpetually, in the most marginalized, the most disempowered communities. Nations, communities of color, nations and communities that were suffering from a host of other factors that were keeping them from being heard, from being listened to, from being empowered. It continued to expand its operations elsewhere as more and more people found themselves next door to a frack site, next door to a pipeline, next door to an oil spill. First they said, I really don't like this, including when the CEO of ExxonMobil had a frack site built near his house in Dallas. Guess what he did?
He moved.
He moved. No. What would you move from the CEO of ExxonMobil? Would you move or would you make the frack site move? Yeah, he made the frack site move. He sued and he got it so it would be next to him. And got rid of it. What has happened is first people said, this is not an acceptable mode of energy and transportation provision. But what has happened that has been even better, even made it so that the fossil fuel industry is much more weak, is that as more people found themselves being situated near fossil fuel operations or experiencing the climate crisis for themselves, they began to look to those who had had that experience for decades, for 150 years. From the very beginning of the fossil fuel industry, there have been communities on the front lines, workers on the front lines, who said, no, we are going to organize to stop this, we are going to try and stop it, we have solutions, we have alternatives, but time and time and time again, they weren't listened to, they weren't supported, they weren't uplifted. Their solutions were not seen as solutions, their expertise was not seen as expertise. Their capacity to organize was not seen as something to follow. Louisiana, 150 years of fossil fuel operations in Louisiana. One of the strongest environmental justice movements in the world, now being seen as offering that critical leadership that all of the rest of us who are seeing that, having that aha moment, are able to say, there are leaders we can turn to who have been proposing solutions, who have been describing what the transition should look like, who have been telling us that as the climate crisis has worsened, relying on centralized fossil fuel energy systems is ridiculous. Not only does it perpetuate the climate crisis, which is harming us, but those of us who spent time in Louisiana know this. When you've got a centralized fossil fuel system, the further the consumer is away from their source of energy, the more energy it takes to move, so the more energy you need to get the energy to that user, but the more chains there are that can be broken. It has to travel. Storms come, fires come, and it destroys that line of transmission. And that centralized fossil fuel system is sitting there providing energy to nobody. When you provide that localized, right next door to you, let's pretend this is a solar panel because it emits enormous amounts of energy. That energy system is right next to you. It's renewable, it's clean, it's green, it is sustainable in and of itself. It has to travel a very short distance to get to you. It's small because it only needs to provide for a small community. It uses less energy. And when that storm comes, it's right there. There's nothing in the way. And guess what? Houses with solar panels on them somehow are less often destroyed in storms than those that don't have solar panels on them. Like someone is looking out for those solar panel houses. What we have to do, and by we, Rebecca has a wonderful footnote in here on the description of we, how we think about the use of we, how to position yourself in knowing who your we is, and when to embrace the full we, and when to know you're speaking for a very certain subset of we. We, most of us in this room, though not all, are among those super high-end consumers of energy and fuel. If 90% of the global population stopped using energy right now, we still wouldn't get down to 1.5 degrees. Why is that? Because the top 10 consumers use so much, that it doesn't matter. That's shocking, right? Now what that means is that the top 10% of consumers, which a lot of us probably are, have to be able to live actually healthier, more sustainable lives that are healthier for ourselves and healthier for our children. If we, those of us who live in cities, for example, the majority of the population right now, move to public transportation as an efficient, safe, renewable energy-powered system of getting around, if we have walkable cities where we can walk around, the amount of pollution would be reduced dramatically. I'm really supportive of Biden's new proposal, which is the largest reduction on tailpipe emissions ever proposed, which is fantastic and will reduce pollution dramatically. What I am not supportive of is using that as a transition mode to replacing all of our cars with electric cars, because that keeps us in that extractivist mode. We have to extract that resource from somewhere to power those individual cars. Instead, the more that we move to public transportation, we will reduce that pollution, we will be healthier, we will have less pollution, we will walk more, we will get around more, we will see each other more. Studies show that people who get around on public transportation are happier than those that are in cars alone because of the communal experience of being on public transit. It's amazing, right? But we will lead happier, healthier lives if we reduce our consumption. The folks in Louisiana, fossil fuels are the center point of our climate crisis. They also create a myriad of human health and environmental harms on the ground when they're produced, extracted, transported, refined, turned into the feedstocks for plastics, transported. In an area of Louisiana known as Cancer Alley, the entire United States, 7 of the 10 census tracts with the highest risk of cancer in the entire nation are all isolated in one little strip within Louisiana between New Orleans and Baton Rouge along the Mississippi River. These are communities that have lived along this area, primarily Black, primarily low-income communities, where the fossil fuel industry moved in on top of them. There are some 200 fossil fuel and petrochemical operations that moved in on top of these communities and created the conditions for the worst cancer risk in the entire nation because of those toxic pollutants. These communities are environmental justice communities that have been organizing for decades. Just this month, they have called for a critically important proposal, a moratorium on any new fossil fuel or petrochemical operations, no more. That is the line that we all need to follow and that we all need to take. Those places that can go fastest, quickest, to rapidly reduce our dependence on fossil fuels need to do it rapidly and quickly, and right away. We need to say no more. And we need to say that the industry that led us down this path is not the industry to guide us out of it. Let's remember, as we wrap up, thank you, that fossil fuels are natural resources. I once had the incredible privilege of being in a submarine at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico at the site of the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I saw oil 4 years later that was still at the bottom of the ocean, that had suffocated the life that needed to live there, and that will be there forever. But the person who took me down there, what she really wanted me to see was a few miles over. And that was an area of the ocean that had what are called natural seeps, where a teeny bit of oil naturally seeps out of the bottom of the ocean floor. And she wanted me to see the worms that live off of that oil, that their ability to live is dependent on the oil at the bottom of the ocean. And what the message we took from that was, it's not the oil, it's not the coal, it's not the gas, it's what we have done with it. We have turned these into weapons of mass destruction. And not we, who's the we? The fossil fuel companies. The fossil fuel companies have. And do we really want to see these companies that have taken this resource and give them the sun and the wind and the waves? We need to embrace the sun and the wind and the waves. Uplift and support all those communities that have the solutions, that have been organizing for them, have their backs, give them platforms, follow them, end the era of fossil fuels, and embrace the clean, green energy transition, and we need you to do it. So thank you for being here.
How do you follow those three? I don't know about you, I just found what the three of them had to say incredibly, not just inspiring, a word that means to inhale, but, which leads in interesting directions, but also reinforcing, their strength, their commitment, their integrity, I think is contagious, and this is why good stories are so important. Capitalism sort of commercial culture wants us to be good consumers, and being good consumers means being bad human beings, means people who displace their deepest desires onto things money can buy, people who forget that our deepest desires are for meaning and connection and hope, forget that we are tremendously powerful, forget that there are things better than anything money can buy. And so I feel like so much of the battle is always a storytelling battle. You just recreate sets of stories from somebody who's in the room with the Vatican, somebody who's at the bottom of the ocean, somebody who is meeting the grief of students face to face, which makes me think the four of us should build a climate commencement address and put it out before the end of the semester. I think, these people make me do a book. This always makes me do the next thing. This is how it works. And what was I going to say? But so, these are the people I gathered together. I'm going to say, I said a word about Yale. Tomorrow I'm talking about looking to people who knew what to do in the world, or who were resolute when their worlds were ending, who were nevertheless living by principle, living to see what can I do in this minute, in this hour, in this day, even if I think we're going to die in the Warsaw Ghetto, or the wars against Native America tomorrow. And there's another essay by my friend Roshi Joan Halifax, a Buddhist leader and medical anthropologist, which is also really good. She's not even a boomer, she's 80, she's, from before them. And she has a real sense of human toughness, a real commitment to looking at not trauma, which is a very popular topic nowadays, but post-traumatic growth, that suffering is inevitable. This is what it means to be unearthed. We will not, none of us will survive unbroken, undamaged, But the great news is we're not made out of china, and we will not just lie there in fragments necessarily. Then her real sense is that this often strengthens us. It builds our character, we learn from it. And which is not to say that I think all suffering is fine, and the suffering that comes out of racism, climate injustice, etc. is fine. But I think that for those of us who in this country who could be equipped to do the work, we're often told we're too fragile, that we can't do this, we can't deal with uncertainty, with precariousness, we can't deal with loss. And yet I think in some ways that human nature is to deal with all those things. And you can go to other parts of the world and see people who face them differently. And so I think that's another piece of the story we tried to change with this book. And so much of it is about the stories we tell, and the stories are the engines of our, that get us to where we need to go. They're the maps we travel on. They're our identity, they're our belief system, they're our values. And there are so many destructive stories, the stories of consumerism, which really tell you that human nature is banal and selfish. It should be banal and selfish itself. The stories of fragility, the stories of powerlessness, the stories of cynicism. And so it's always worth examining, what does this story want me to do? And there's a lot of stories that want us to give up. I read a great thing today on the train down from New York about how climate denial and climate doomism are kind of the same story, that there's nothing we can do. Well, one says that there's nothing we need to do, one says there's nothing we can do. Both of them say you don't have to do anything. So I think to wrap it up, we're all here to say that you cannot just do something, you can do a hell of a lot. And here's three people who are doing an extraordinary amount. It's everybody's job who's doing anything more than he's struggling to survive right now. And I'm not really a workaholic, but I'm somebody who thinks that good work is one of the most meaningful things we can have. Another part of consumer culture is a story that all we really want in life is vacation. Vacation is great, but it doesn't necessarily give you meaning. We want work that's so meaningful we may want to rest, but we don't want to just avoid and abandon it. And the work of protecting this world, of solidarity, of building a future, is such good work to do. I was with my godson yesterday, who's 6, and who will be 84 in the year 2100, Tomorrow I'm going to go see his grandmother who's 90. And we tend to think the deep future is somehow so far out there, so unimaginable. The fact that, when Atlas, my godson, is the age of his grandmother, will be the year 2090, is a reminder that it's not that far away. There are at least 2 younger people in the room than that. And we have to do it for them. But I think also understanding time in a different way is so helpful. One of the stories we tell in this book is about how the world of 2073 we need to make is unimaginable. But that doesn't mean we can't make it. The unimaginable and impossible are completely different things. And the way we know that, because the future is dark, we cannot see it. But we can look backward and see when the world of now was the future. We could see the world of 1973, where a pretty new women's movement, queer rights movement, an ongoing civil rights movement, a growing indigenous rights movement. Because in 1973, people were like, oh, the 60s are over and we lost. It was just the beginning in many ways for queer rights. I'm a proud San Franciscan, and it's been a joy to be one of the great parts of queer culture and see it build and grow all my 43 years there. The women's movement, which has completely transformed the life possible for me in ways that are so much better than my mother's. So indigenous insurgencies that were so strong in the 1970s and continued in the 90s and onward, the environmental movements, etc. The world of 2023 is absolutely unimaginable in 1973. And terrible things were coming, including climate change, which a few saw, but almost nobody was thinking about. Some of the depredations of technology, Silicon Valley, authoritarianism, we know the troubles. But the good things were coming, and no one really saw what's going. The world of marriage equality, the world of legalized abortion in Mexico, Argentina, and Spain. The world of so many of these things, the world of renewable energy was unimaginable. So we sail towards an unimaginable future, or maybe we row towards it, because I'm a rower and you look backwards, and you can fix your gaze on something steady to keep you going to where you need to go. So we're building a world that has to be utterly different than the world that we had before. And I think as Antonio said, it has to be materially different. As Marianne said, it has to be materially different. We have to be basic also. But I think there will be a world of transformed values. We'll have to learn the lessons Indigenous people never forgot and have been telling us, to think about consequences, to recognize the interconnection. We can also learn from science and medicine. It has to be a world of different values. And I think those values are here. The seeds have been planted, they're growing. They never stop growing in parts of the world. So, to wrap it up, we're building a radically different world in response to the absolute disaster that doing the things the way we've done them has been. The we that is capitalism, the we that is the global north, the we that is a fossil fuel powered civilization. It can be better in many ways. What's coming into focus that I see in the young already is better. It is everything, it's worth everything, and it's worth giving our all to. And with that, I think we ran out of question time. And I'm just going to thank you all, and we will definitely sign books. I want to thank Busboys and poets and all the people working to make this space happen. I want to thank you. And thank you all so much.
Let's give them another round of applause, please.
Encore.
Never mind. All right, folks, we are actually going to forego the Q&A today. I know, disappointing, but that's so that hopefully everyone gets a chance to actually speak with the authors. Is that okay, guys? I'm sorry. Yeah, so we're going to actually The books are over there for purchase, and we're gonna have a line coming through this way, and they're gonna work their way down the line.